In this episode, we are going to be talking about the difference between arguments and parameters. You'll often hear these words used interchangeably, but there is a technical difference, and I'm not here to be nitpicky about words. Rather, I want you to understand the difference so you don't make any mistakes. So, let's take a look at a method call. When we do something like math.pow, and we pass in some data here, these are known as arguments. So we're passing two arguments, the first one being 3 and the second one being 5, and they're separated by a comma. These are the inputs. Now the POW method works as its own thing. Consider it a black box that takes input and output. On the inside of this method, there's going to be something to contain these values, and those are known as parameters. So they're essentially variables created for this method. So if we explore this by opening up the declaration, you can see that there's this double A and double B. So the person developing this power method is going to use A and B, the variables, to refer to the values we pass in. A would contain the value 3 and B would contain the value 5 because that's what we passed in, 3 and 5. What a lot of people get confused on is that these are self-contained, meaning I can have two variables called A and B. Let's keep the numbers reasonably sized. And we can pass these in here. That's because these are different variables than the ones created in the method. So we can run this and we can output the output just to see what we get. And you can see we get this number here, 10,000. It's not so confusing here because obviously power is defined somewhere else and it's kind of self-contained, but people often get confused when they're creating their own methods. For example, if you created a method down here, we'll just say public static void do something, and this will take an integer A, and it's just going to output the value. So literally this method is completely pointless. We can invoke this method and we can pass in our A. A is actually a double right now, so it's complaining about the type. So let's just say this takes a double instead. So everything checks out, we don't got any compiling errors, and we could run this and you can see we get the value 10. But here's a question, what if we have a field with that name? So a field being a variable defined at this level, the class level, and we make this a double and call it A. Inside of this method, when we say print A, what is it talking about? Well, if let's say we assign value 50 to that, we still get the output 10. So it's obviously referring to this one here, and when we pass in A, it's getting the value from this variable right here. So what if we're desperate and we really just want to use this one here? How do we access it within this method? It's actually pretty simple. All you have to do is say cameras.a. Running it now, we get 50. So in this situation, we're not using this parameter at all. We're just using the field that's available in this class. All right, but here's the next question. What if we want to access this variable a from this method? Because if we say cameras.a, we're referring to the field. If we just say a, we're referring to the parameter. How do we refer to the variable that we're passing in as an argument? Well, it's actually not possible. Always consider methods to be self-contained and don't consider where they're being invoked. Now, the only other thing I wanted to call out in this video is that the type of the arguments and the parameters can be different if there is an implicit conversion from the argument to the parameter. So in this situation, we're taking a double, but it's perfectly okay for us to pass in an integer. We can even pass in a float. But we can't pass in something that obviously doesn't make sense, such as true. There's no implicit conversion from true to double. Or a string, we can't pass in 5.0, unless we did something like integer.parseInt and then passed in that value, which we could do. So for example, we could have a string and we can pass that in as an argument here.